Never have I seen a game so polarizing in the Zelda fanbase as The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. On the one hand, there are people like AG Entertainment or Chugga Conroy who laud Skyward Sword as one of the best games on the Wii, but on the other hand, there are people like The Gaming Grit and ntom64 who find much to criticize about Skyward Sword and say it leaves a lot to be desired as a Zelda game. Oh wait! This is my video, who cares about their opinions? Well, with the game having been out for over a year and a half now, I think it's time to finally share my thoughts on The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. Now before I jump into this, I'd just like to say, this won't be a traditional style review with me going over presentation, music, and all that good stuff, but rather, I'll be going on a point-by-point basis, talking about aspects of the game that stood out to me. Without wasting even more time, let's get on with this. The Legend of Zelda series has always been about breaking pots and invading people's privacy. I mean, heck, a locked door is considered odd. And then there's exploration or something, I guess. I don't know. But you see, that last part is where Skyward Sword falls short, bringing me to point number 1. Skyward Sword has one of the worst Zelda overworlds ever. When I first heard about Skyward Sword, I heard comparisons between the sky and the Great Sea from Wind Waker. Suffice it to say, I was sorely disappointed by the sky. It's so barren and there's very little exploration to do. The sky is big, but so empty. With what few floating islands there actually are, you really only need to go to them once to do whatever you need to do there. Compared to the fantastic Great Sea from Wind Waker, the sky falls flat on its face. In the Great Sea, there's so much to explore, with an island on the horizon wherever you are. And along the way, who knows what you'll find? Maybe an enemy base on the sea or a giant octopus? Wind Waker is exploration done right. Even beyond the realm of the sky, I'm not a fan of how the areas are connected. Or should I say how they're disconnected. Now, I'm not a fan of Twilight Princess's overworld because it's a bit too open for my taste, and I really don't feel like exploring it. But Skyward Sword has kind of the opposite problem. You see, you enter the areas of the game via holes in the clouds, but to go to a different area, you have to go back to the sky and fly to the next hole in the clouds to go to the next area you want. It just leaves a massive feeling of disconnection between the areas, and I feel it could have been executed better. Point number 2. The art style of Skyward Sword is absolutely amazing. It's like the aesthetics of Wind Waker and Twilight Princess had a baby, and the result is just a treat for the eyes. While the Wii is graphically limited, having an art style with a drawn kind of look to it can be used to great effect, something Skyward Sword nails. You see, even if technology advances, the game's presentation will still hold up years from now because it has great aesthetics, which is apparent with games like Wind Waker or Parappa the Rapper and other cel-shaded games. Every 3D Zelda game, starting of course from Ocarina of Time, has had some day and night system. Bringing me to point number 3, Skyward Sword's day and night system is quite possibly one of the worst day and night systems in any Zelda game. You see, it's daytime all the time, unless you decide to sleep in a bed. However, in previous games, day slowly transitioned into night, giving the whole world a sense of progression, truly, no pun intended, linking you to it and making you feel like you're part of the world. In Skyward Sword, it's just so abrupt, creating a massive disconnect between Link and the player. Point number 4. The combat of Skyward Sword is phenomenal, but the motion controls for everything else are a bit iffy. The Wiimote's potential is finally realized with one-to-one swordplay. It's what the combat of Twilight Princess should have been. Everything is tailored to the one-to-one motion controls. To accommodate for the freedom of combat, enemies are much more intelligent, making it feel all the more rewarding when you best an enemy in combat. And it's some of my favorite combat in a Zelda game. However, with one-to-one motion controls, the game feels the need to use motion controls for as much as possible. Harp, motion controls, swimming, motion controls, flying, motion controls, skydiving, motion controls. All of those could have easily been mapped to the nunchuck's analog stick. Now, I've often heard reports of wonky motion controls when playing Skyward Sword, but this only really occurred for me with the harp, which I'll get to later, and swimming. Swimming really gets screwed up easily. Point number 5. Besides being incredibly tiny, leaving little room for exploration, the land-based environments of the game are really uninspired and just lazy. Forest? Oh, never seen that one before. Desert? That's never been done. Volcano/fiery area? Yeah, I've never seen that. You see what I'm getting at? The environments are just rehashed from previous Zelda games. Also, being forced to go back to the same environment 3 times each is just a lazy way to pad out the game without having to design more environments. Sure, your environment changes slightly, but it's really not that significant. I will admit that using time stones in Lanairu to change sand to water was a very cool concept, but still, we've already done sailing. My point is, the environments are just lazy and unoriginal. Point number 6. Skyward Sword does a decent job at trying to tie up the loose ends of the overall plot. It does an admirable job of explaining the goddess Hylia and explaining the formation of the Master Sword. In particular, the forging of the Master Sword is quite cool to see as you slowly strengthen your sword to an efficient killing machine. Not only seen in cutscenes, but also in gameplay. And letting the player discover the power of the upgraded sword for himself is important, rather than just showing the player. While I do appreciate the fact that the Master Sword is explained, the game still feels the need to fall back on mythology to explain the plot. Let me elaborate. The whole purpose of the game is to explain how everything later on in the series comes to be, but it still tells you, long ago, which defeats the point of explaining everything if the plot's just gonna fall back on, the goddess willed it long ago, or, because Hylia said so. Case in point, the Goddess Sword. You forge the Master Sword from the Goddess Sword, which, okay, yeah, that makes sense, but the Goddess Sword is given no other explanation other than the goddess placed it here for the chosen hero, and Fee is the spirit of the sword. Speaking of Fee, that brings me to point number 7. Fee is annoying and unnecessary. Fee interrupts far too often with obvious messages such as, "Master, your Wii Remote batteries are running low." Or, "Master, there's an 86% chance the Wii Remote will accurately follow your movements." She just states the obvious way too often. Also, dowsing, one of the main gimmicks of Skyward Sword, is a huge hand-holding element which is completely unnecessary for Zelda veterans. However, because of dowsing, Skyward Sword does make a good entry point into the Zelda series, but pushes veterans to the side, and that's one of my main problems with Skyward Sword. I feel Nintendo tried to make it too accessible and simple. The puzzles are really simple, everything is motion controlled, and the environments are really simple with little exploration. Point number 8. The music integration is subpar. Yes, I'm going to be harping on the harp. As I mentioned earlier. You see, from a plot standpoint, music would seem important to the game, having you revisit each major area to get parts of a song. But from a gameplay standpoint, music is heavily underplayed. Yes, I did just say that. What I mean is, whenever I stand near a glowing circle on the ground, I just bring up the harp and wave the Wii Remote back and forth like crazy until something happens. It doesn't make me feel like I'm actually playing a harp, but when I do have to wave the Wii Remote in time with the beat, it fails to recognize my movements half the time. Point number 9. The inventory system needs to be changed. Sort of. I think that changing items in real time is a welcome change because it keeps the game moving and you're always on your toes, but I think having to manage your inventory was a poor design choice. You see, you have a limited number of slots for any given items, including very important ones like bottles and your shield. Additional inventory space is scarce, and having to go back to a safe to change up your inventory is just time-consuming. With all that said, I think it's time to wrap things up. While I do believe Skyward Sword is a great entry point for Zelda newcomers, it hardly appeals to fans of the Zelda series with its extreme simplicity and gimmickry. There are things that I enjoy like the combat, but overall the game feels lazy and uninspired.